Hi everybody, welcome back to Small Caliber Arms Review. A long time ago, back in the 1950s at Knott's Berry Farm in California, there was a stuntman by the name of Dee Woolem. Dee was one of the pioneers of fast draw, and along with some of the technicians that worked at Knott's Berry Farm, they developed a timing system so that they could see how fast somebody could draw and fire a single action army, and thus the sport of cowboy fast draw was pretty much invented or established or started, pioneered right there. Back in the 50s or 60s, Tandy come out with a kit that you could buy that was the Dee Woolem fast draw holster kit. Now it was an actual kit, so it came with a couple things in there. It came with a metal lined natural tooling leather sheath, which was, I mean, it had all the parts and pieces in it you needed to completely make the whole holster. It had a metal lined natural tooling leather back plate on it, and then had some other little pieces with some yellow Latigo lace, rivets, screws, complete pattern and instructions. Tandy doesn't make that kit anymore, but they do offer on their website, in their leather library, they offer the patterns for the holster that was in that kit. Now you can download it and you can take it to a print shop somewhere and have a full-size pattern printed off, which is kind of what this one is. But what I opted to do was I actually printed this out in like a mosaic. You can print it out on multiple sheets of 8.5 by 11. You can do it at home. You don't have to go to a print shop anywhere. You just have to cut the pieces out and tape them together. And this was actually, this piece was split amongst 4 sheets, but I taped it together. The apron that goes on the back of it was done in 2 pieces, and then the strap was also done in 2 pieces. Now this was, the original kit was made out of about 7-ounce leather, so I've got a piece of 7-ounce here that I've used to make some other holsters out of. And we're going to get this thing cut out, and we're going to do the tooling on it and everything. I do have some lace here. This is a deerskin lace. It's only 1/8 inch, so I'll probably be cutting out my own lace because the spine of this, where it folds over and sews together, is actually laced up instead of stitched. Now I'm not going to put the metal liner in it. It was an aluminum metal liner that was in there. So some of the instructions that come with this are going to tell you how to shape it and everything. We're just going to make it completely out of leather, and it does not come with a belt pattern, so I'm not going to make a belt for it right now. Might not even make a belt for it, but we are going to get the holster made up. Let's get busy on that. Now, somewhere in the instructions, and it's going to be more than just these 2 pages here, but if you download it, it's going to tell you what firearms it'll fit. And I think one is the Colt New Frontier, a Han 45, a Crossman 45, but this is a Cimarron, I'm sorry, this is a Pieta 45 Colt, and it's a 4 3/4 inch barrel, and I believe it's going to fit. Just kind of wrapping it around there. It looks like it's got plenty of room. Now it is going to sit, the trigger guard is going to be completely outside of the holster, so it'll sit something like that right there. And then there's plenty of room at the end of it there to the end of the barrel, so you could probably do a 5.5 inch in there if you wanted. But there is a hole that's going to be right down here at the bottom that's going to contain a Chicago screw that is going to attach it to the apron down there at the bottom. And then there's 2 holes there for the tie-down thong that goes around your leg. The strap that goes around it there is actually attached directly to the apron, and then it comes over the top of it there, and then the front of it gets laced up on there. Maybe I got that upside down, not sure. We'll figure it out before we get going anyways. Yeah, that's a little better there. That way the flower design is right side up. Anyways, we're going to get this cut out of some leather and get it put together. Okay, I've got my pattern laid out on my piece of leather here and what I think will be the most efficient use of the leather. And I went ahead and put a light pencil line on there. So I'm going to go ahead and get that cut out, and then it'll be a little easier for me to work around with that one smaller piece than it will the whole hide there. So I'll get to cutting this out, and then I can get the bigger piece out of the way. All right, now it is not a very big pattern, which is pretty cool. It's also not in one piece, which is, you know, kind of uncool, I guess. But I think it'll be just fine. And I'm going to trace around this with a fine point ballpoint pen. Get out some of my cutting utensils here. Now this is just regular copy paper here, so you'll want to be careful when you're tracing it out. You can transfer it to bigger paper if you want, thicker paper, but I'm just going to use this. Now when you print this pattern out, there's going to be, I think, 16 pages that are there, and 2 of them are going to be the really large pages. And it says on there, if you take this to a print shop, that they should be able to print it out the correct size. And there's nothing on this pattern to scale it to. I've downloaded some other patterns before that'll have a little square block on there that'll be set to either 1 inch or, you know, so many millimeters, 25.4 millimeters or whatever. It requires you to print it on a certain size page with no scaling and all that. And I did find that printing this on 8.5 by 11s, which is standard in the United States, and printing it out just with no scaling seems to come out the correct size. So you'll definitely want to check that if you're printing this out yourself. And if you take it to a print shop, something like Staples or Office Depot or Office Max or whatever's still around these days, you'll want to make sure that it's the right size. But like I said, there's nothing on there to scale it to, so it could be a little bit tricky. Now another thing when I printed this out is, you see I have it in 2 different sizes. I have it on a full-size sheet, and then I have these pieces right here were printed on 8.5 by 11s. And the reason I went ahead and went with this rather than the full-size sheet is because this pattern, I overlaid the 2 to look at them and see what the differences were, or if they both come out the same size. And the one on the 8.5 by 11 sheets seemed to be just a tiny bit larger. Not much. The holster was probably 1/8 of an inch wider or so, so I figured, you know what, let's go ahead and go for the wider one, just because if it's too big, it's a fast draw holster. It's not supposed to hold the firearm in there tightly. It's supposed to allow it pretty much 0 retention for fast draw. So I thought, well, the bigger one will be just fine. We'll go ahead and get these pieces cut apart so they're even easier to work with. When you're cutting through these, if you've got a little piece where it did not cut all the way through, if you tear, I'm going to go ahead and do this right here, but that wasn't too bad. If you tear it, sometimes it'll be kind of fuzzy. If you do that right on your lines, that can cause you a little bit of, I guess, heartache or grief or something. All right, we've got all 3 pieces cut out. Now we need to get the design transferred on there, as well as all of our punch marks that are marked out on the pattern. And I'll show you one of the things I like to do with these patterns, because we're going to have to wet the leather down to get the tooling marks that we're going to do on there. So I like to take some packaging tape and cover these so that they won't soak up water in the paper and tear when we go to trace that on there. Now this can get kind of tricky with the tape because the static wants to kind of pick it up on you. You want to try to do it with no wrinkles in it, unlike what I just did there. If you have access to a laminator, it would be a whole lot nicer. And you'll want to do it on both sides. Okay, I've got my poor man's laminating done on there, and I've covered it both sides with clear packing tape. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and lay out all my punch marks. Now there's different ones according to different things, but some of them are going to be the same no matter what. So I'm going to punch these 2 in here. These are where it will fold over and attach to down here. There's the 2 on the bottom here that are for the leg tie, the leg tie down thong. And on this particular pattern, there's 3 more marks right here. Now this is adjusting the angle you want the holster at. We're going to go ahead and just pick the center one. That should be straight up and down, or pretty close to it anyways. And I have the option to do the other 2, so I'm going to go ahead and put the marks there. And I'll kind of determine how I want it after that. Now I'm not going to do the tooling marks just yet. I'm going to go ahead and get all my punch marks laid out while it's dry. And there are several marks on here. So you've got the ones where it laces up. And then you've got a couple here for the hammer thong. You've got the 4 on here for where this attaches to the back piece there, or the apron. And then the 4 on the other side for where it laces up. And then we'll go ahead and do the holster. Now the holster, the only ones in there are the ones for where it laces together. So we're going to go ahead and punch those in there. And these actually take a lace instead of a stitch line on there. You can stitch it up if you want to. I would just put the stitch line closer between the lace holes and the edge. And then your lace will cover up those stitches on there. Now I am going to put a stitch line all the way around here. There was stitches on the original one just because that's where the metal liner was on the inside there. But since I'm not going to do a metal liner on here, they're just going to be decorative. But I kind of like the looks of it too. Alright, I got all my marks punched on there on all 3 pieces. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get these things cased, and then we'll get that design put in there. Okay, so when I'm casing my leather, I just use plain old water. I don't use any kind of elaborate concoctions or mixtures or anything. Just, I like to get the whole thing wet, even if it's in an area that I'm not tooling, just because I found that sometimes it makes the leather dye a little bit differently where it was wet and where it stayed dry. So you don't want to get it sopping wet, you don't want it to be mushy, and you want to get it to where the water soaks in pretty quick, and then let it sit for a few minutes. Alright, we will move back to the first one we did while those 2 are resting. Put our pattern right back on there. Now I've got this, it's one of the stamping tools. I got this one from, I'm pretty sure it was Tandy. It is a craft tool number 6059, and it's just like a ballpoint pen without the ink. So we will hold this down on there. Don't press too hard because you've cased your leather, and then you want to just trace over your lines there. Give it a little bit of pressure because you're trying to transfer that mark into the leather underneath there. And it doesn't matter, these are guidelines, it doesn't matter if you don't get it perfect, because we're going to be able to fix a lot of it when we're tooling. Sometimes it is hard to tell where you've already gone and where you haven't, but just pay attention and mark it out just like it is on the pattern. Okay, I think I've got them all traced out. And there you can see the pattern makes a nice little dark impression on there, and then it'll be easier to follow around with the swivel knife. And most of the lines that you're going to be doing from the pattern are going to be cut in there with the swivel knife, and then the rest of it will be stamping to give it the shading and texturing and everything it needs. So we'll go ahead and get the other ones done up and then move on. Okay, all 3 of our pieces have got the design pressed into them there a little bit, so now we can get out the swivel knife and do some carving. Alright, if you haven't seen me do any swivel knife work on this channel, this is a swivel knife. It is a very sharp, pretty shallow angle on the blade there, so you're not trying to cut all the way through. You just want to cut into the surface of it. Now I did pick me up a new knife from Tandy that I have not used yet, so I'm going to break this one out for the first time and give it a try. It's one of the Craft Tool Pros, and it has a little narrower angled blade on this one here. So I'm going to give this one a try. Now the little yoke on the top is for you to put your finger in there, and then it's a swivel knife. The reason they call it a swivel knife is because the blade swivels. So we're going to go ahead and give it a try. This angled blade, I've never used one of these before, but we're going to try to go ahead and give this thing a go and see how it does. The whole idea of cutting that in there is when you go to stamp, if you've got a cut and you push down one side, it leaves the other side raised up. So that's what you want to go for in here. And to tell you the truth, I think I like the other one better for these types of cuts. Okay, I often find this part most difficult because it tends to want to cramp up my hands a little bit. Maybe it's a little old age and arthritis or something getting going on there, but who knows. Make sure you put your caps back on there, because if you bump one of these things, it's gonna hurt. Now the new one I bought, they are adjustable for height, so that can help, I guess, ease some of the pain on your fingers. That might be a little better there. But I already got all my cutting in there done with the other one. Like I said, it's a little wider blade on this one than it is on this one. This is more of a fine cutting one with the angled blade on there. But they are nice because they swivel like that. It's to help you work around curves and stuff. But now we're going to have to get these things tooled up and everything now. And we're going to go ahead and start with the holster piece here. Okay, so one of the things you definitely want to get is go to a cabinet shop or something. Some of the leather suppliers also sell these, but this is a piece of, I don't know, granite, marble, whatever it is. It's a big heavy stone piece. It's a cutout from a sink or a cabinet or something. And I have glued a piece of EVA foam on the back of it there, which actually was a floor mat. So it's got the what do you call it, diamond texture on it. Get you one of those though, because you're going to want a nice solid background, and that piece of EVA foam on the back of it kind of dampens some of the noise. Now I've got a whole slew of tools here, and in the pattern it's going to come with this. This is called a photo carve pattern, and it's going to tell you, there's a bunch of numbers on here to tell you what tools that they used in this. But some of these tools were made in the 50s and 60s, and they just don't make them anymore. So we're going to do what I think should be on there. And what we're going to start with is we're going to start with the beveling and the background. So we can look on the pattern and see what's where there, and we'll go for that. So I've got a couple different bevelers here. These are shaded bevelers. So I'm going to do around the outside of some of these pieces. And you want to just keep a nice, smooth, steady movement when you're doing these. And be careful with it, because I mean, you can mess it up. There are also many different sizes of these bevelers. You can see here I got 3 of them that I'm going to use. I've got one pretty large, one a little bit smaller, and one kind of a medium one. There we go. We'll put them in order, and it's to help you get into different areas and stuff. So we'll start off with kind of this narrow one here and do just a little bit in there until we can get it out to where we can get the bigger bevelers in there. Now, it's the ideal thing to do is you don't want to put a lot of pressure with the tool itself. You want to kind of keep it bouncing and then tap along there as you gently move it around. And that'll give us a nice shaded beveled area around there. And one of the things I've noticed that they've done on this pattern is there is some backgrounding done in different places. So we will use some of our backgrounding tools. Now you can use these tools, you can use tons of these tools to do all different kind of things. I think they used a bar grounder on there, and I've got 2 of those. which are a little bit different. I've got a, looks like a 5-spot and a 3-spot hole, whatever you want to call it. So they've got some different patterns in there. And feel free to do whatever it is you want on there. It doesn't matter. It's up to you, and we're going to kind of fade that out a little bit. We want a random thing in there. We don't want specific patterns. At least I don't. You can do whatever it is you want on these things. It's completely up to you. With the shaders, the bevelers and stuff, I like to do very light. You can always go back over it and go heavier if you want to, but sometimes less is more in these. You don't need to hit real hard either. You can just gently go around this thing. Little light taps. This is the part my wife loves the most, is hearing that constant tap, 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 tap. And if you gently tap and move along like that, you can get a pretty smooth shaded bevel on there. And like I said, we're just going to go around this thing and do what I feel like doing on here. And you by no means have to use the same tools I'm using. You can use whatever ones you want, unless you're trying to do exactly like the pattern you've got, which may be hard. Like I said, some of these tools have probably not been in production for many, many years, and I just wanted to stick with the tools I already had, so that's what I'm doing. The whole idea of some of these tools is to give you more depth to it. So like right in here, the piece I just tooled, this is supposed to be a leaf kind of curled over, so we want a shadow underneath there. So we bevel it with the shaded beveler, and it gives it a little more depth in there. And then some of the things they've done on this pattern here is, I do not have the exact same tool they've got, but to give it a little more depth and everything, they've used one of these veiners. It's a type of veiner anyways, and have done a little pattern in there, and we will try to somewhat replicate that. And that's, like I said, it's not the same tool, but you know, it's not terrible, I guess. All kind of things you can do with these tools. And sometimes they give them little decorative cuts, and I'm kind of jumping around on here. Usually you want to do all of one thing and then move to another, but just kind of showing you some of the things you can do on here. So we'll do a little decorative cut right in here. And that's it. I mean, it's what you feel like doing to it, pretty much. We got a little leaf down here. We'll put some shading in there. And I think what I'm going to do is, I've got a pear shader here somewhere. This is just a smooth rounded shader, and we're going to do this little leaf down here at the bottom, and we will give it a little depth in there. All right, so I've got all my tooling done on the apron or the skirt or the back piece, whatever you want to call it. I've got all my tooling done on the holster, and I've got all the tooling done on the loop. So what I'm going to do now is I already established a stitch groove around the outside there, so I'm going to go ahead and get the holes punched, and I'm going to use my Weaver 3mm punches because it matches up pretty close to the photo carve pattern that's supplied with it. And like I said, this seam right here is not going to be seen because it's going to get lace where these bigger holes are going to be punched in there. And I'm going to punch in about I think it calls for a number 3 or number 4 drive punch. I'm going to use I think it's a 4mm punch, and I'm going to go ahead and punch my holes in there. I did a couple practice holes, and they're pretty good sized holes that are in there, but when I run that 1/4" lace through there, it seems to be all right. Now the lace I did cut myself out of some really thin, I think it's 2 to 3 ounce leather, and if this isn't enough, I've got another piece, and I can always cut more, but these are some that I cut for doing some other little projects, and I figured I'd go ahead and use them. Let's get to punching a whole lot of holes all the way around the outside of this and this. Now, just like when I'm doing the tooling, I also like to do the hole punching on this, but I do have it's a little cutting board that comes with a kit I bought from Tandy many years ago when I got started, but it seems to work just fine. This thing has had, I would venture to say, millions of holes punched in it, so it's going to get a few more. I also like to use a little bit of wax on these punches when I'm doing it because it makes it getting in and out of the holes a whole lot easier. Now I am punching one hole at a time too, so first time, last hole. And I am only using the 2-hole punch because there aren't really any straight lines on here. Everything's got somewhat of a curve to it. I guess it wouldn't matter much on this seam because it gets covered up by lace anyways. All right, that is a lot of holes to punch in this thing, and it takes a while. One thing I did notice is on these Weaver 3mm punches, if you watched my fringed shirt and fringed jacket video, I used a different set of punches that I picked up on Amazon, and I broke them. They broke almost all of those punches except for the single and the, I think, 8 or whatever it is I got, they all broke. The Weaver ones have held up so much better. They're not even bent a little bit, and that's what started happening with the other ones I bought. They started bending and then they would break off. But the Weaver ones really hold up well. Now, I am a Weaver affiliate. I do not work for Weaver, so Tandy, Weaver, doesn't matter to me. I do like some things that each one of them offers better than the other. I will put a link in the description, and I can offer you a 10% discount for about a year, maybe about 11 months left on it anyways. So if you want to go check out some of their stuff, some of their tools, some of their leather, I live close enough to it where I can drive there every now and then, and I like to walk through the warehouse and just the smell of the leather, and then actually pick up each hide and look at it and everything. That's one of the benefits of living close enough to it to be able to do that. But they have good quality products. Now I've still got a few more holes to punch in this thing, and I got the ones for the leg thong, and then the 4 for the loop that holds it on there. So I need to make sure I'm going to put copper rivets in the back here holding this on. No double caps or anything, just regular standard copper rivets. I got a couple of holes here for the hammer thong and then the ones for the lace here. So I'll get all those punched out. You want to space your holes, you want to make them the right size, especially if you're going to be using double cap rivets or tubular rivets or something like that. If the hole's too big, the rivet will kind of want to walk on you a little bit and can really make for some ugly looking rivets. But for these, I'm going to use standard solid copper rivets. Okay, I've got all my holes punched in there. I only punched the center one, and that's the only one that actually holds the holster into the getup on the back plate and everything. The loop on there will hold it from moving around and everything, but the holster itself is held in by that one Chicago screw at the bottom, and then it tips to either direction that you want to put it in. Now, they do not lay out a point on the holster piece for you to punch the hole in there, but you kind of have to fit it up afterwards, and you won't be able to use one of the drive punches to do that because you won't be able to get it in there. So I've got a rotary punch that I can use for that. Here's the rivets. They are a solid copper rivet and burr. So they're going to go on there like that, and they have to be pounded in, and they're going to go this way. Now the holes I punched in there for the lace and everything are pretty much the correct size. What you're going to do on this though is you are going to put, when you put the loop on there, you're going to go through 2 layers of leather on the bottom ones. Oh, and then 3 on the top, because this is going to fold over. That's why it's not so confusing. This is going to fold over, so I got 2 more holes I got to punch in there too. I forgot those 2. Now, one of the things I like to do when I'm doing this is I've got my center point marked out for that. I like to take my punch and push it and give it a little twist and make sure that I'm centered up over that hole, and I can adjust it a little bit and then punch them out. Okay, and then these little things here, you will find tons of these things laying all over the place. Look like mouse turds, but they're not. Anyways, that will fold over, and then I'll be going through 3 layers because the 2 top holes on there are going to be going, it's going to be going all the way through there. Make sure you get this put on the right way. And then you got the 2 holes for the hammer thong in there too. Everything should line up if the pattern was done correctly. And I'll tell you what, it does not look as if it was done correctly. I mean, I marked everything out according to the pattern, but they just don't seem to line up just right. May have to do a little tweaking on here. Maybe I should not have punched all the holes in it first. Anyways, I'm going to get this thing dyed up too before I go to putting it all together, because getting dye behind here once I've got this riveted on is going to be a chore. And I also need to get everything stitched up. There's a lot of stuff to do to this. Okay, so the one thing I did to remedy the hole issue on here, the hole, H-O-L-E, was I had to punch extra holes in it, which is not ideal, but one of these seemed to line up pretty good, only 1 out of 4. So everything I think is going to be okay there. So what I did was I put the 1 in there, put the other 3 rivets in, gave them a little tap, left myself a little mark on the apron there. So that really looks terrible with all those extra holes in there. I should not have punched these in there yet. I should have went ahead and done these and then just transferred the marks over, because then it would have been more accurate. The good thing about it though is when I do put it in there and I push those through, the burr that goes on top of that, and that's the little washer piece, if I can get one out of here, is going to cover up most of that. Maybe not all of that hole. It should cover up this one. Yeah. And then the top flap is going to go over and will cover up any misalignment on those. Of course, the one I left is good. I should have left one of the bottom ones good, and then it would have been easier to cover up the top ones. But I did what I did, so I get what I got. So I'm going to get these rivets out of here, and I really need to bevel these edges on here before I put any dye on it, because I don't want the edges exposed. Now, in the picture that I posted up there of the kit itself, that was a picture from eBay, and it was dyed kind of a light color, and I don't know if I want to do some antiquing on it. I may just use olive oil on this one. Not real sure yet. I would like it to be a lighter brown. And then this holster I did right here, this is the Man with No Name holster. That is just olive oil, so it gives it a little bit darker brown. And then I'll go over it with the antiquing gel once I get that worked in there. Hopefully the oil will keep most of the holster from getting stained up. If it doesn't come out perfect, it doesn't matter, because you can dye this thing any color you want. Let's get to beveling. All right, beveling is probably one of the things I like the most about leatherwork. It's just something about that blade going along there and rounding off that corner. And I probably shouldn't have done that corner, but it'll be all right. And it also takes off any of the ink pen marks I may have left on there when I was tracing out my pattern. On this one, you'll want to, the long edges, you'll want to bevel both inside and outside. On the short edges, I think I'm just going to do the outside, mostly because I already did that one there. And I don't know. It's up to you. If you want to, you can. If you don't have to worry about it. Typically, the rough side is a little tougher to bevel because it gets kind of fuzzy. But if you got a good sharp blade, it seems to do all right. And if it's not sharp, you can always strop it to make it sharp. On the apron or the back flap, I would bevel all the way around it, both sides. Now this would have been a lined holster, and I don't know in the kit how it was put together, if this was already done, or I don't know. I have not seen an unassembled one, but I would assume that just the way it's done, and it doesn't mention anything about stitching in the instructions around there, just the lacing and how to close it up and everything. I would assume the metal liner was already put between the 2 layers of leather, and it was just a soft aluminum that was in the kit. So if you were going to do this with a aluminum liner in it, you would not bevel that side, because you'd want to put your aluminum liner in there and then your leather liner on the inside of it there, and then it would sandwich that piece in there. This one, we're not going to bevel the inside of the long edges there, just the outside of it. So we'll do the outside all the way around. And then on the back side, we'll do top and bottom. And the main reason we want to do that, because when we slick that edge, we want a nice, smooth, rounded over edge on there. It makes it look pretty good. Both top and bottom, you're not going to see this edge on there. I'm thinking beveling the outside edge might help the lace a little bit so it doesn't get kind of a square bend on it. But the reason I didn't bevel the insides is because that's going to get covered up. Plus, I'd like to get a little bit of glue on there to stitch this up. But now that we got everything beveled on here, we can go ahead and get everything cleaned up and get set up for doing a little bit of dye. Now, I kept saying dye, and earlier I talked about just using olive oil. So that's what I'm going to use. I'm just going to go for the olive oil right out of the gate. And the nice thing about this is I don't have to worry about gloves and all that kind of good stuff. Whoa. So I'm just going to get some olive oil worked in this. I'm working in from the back first. Same thing though, I'll put down the paper, and I have a sheet of plastic underneath there. So that'll keep everything from soaking through and getting all over the table. Although it probably wouldn't hurt it too much. Now it is going to soak in there. That leather is going to soak it up pretty good. And you don't want it sopping wet. That becomes a problem if you get it too wet. Just a nice even coat on it and let it do its thing. Try not to let any of it puddle on there either. You want to avoid that. It might give you a little darker colors in some areas than others. Like where I got a drip right here. Okay, you can already see these starting to even out a little bit, which is really nice. I also want to do my, this is going to be my lace piece. So I want to get some olive oil worked into that. Because that piece is definitely going to want to need to be flexible. It won't want anything. It doesn't know. Okay, now for the most boring part of holster making, and the part that takes the most time. We got to let this dry. Okay, I think that's dry enough. It's been a couple hours. It might still be a little moist around the edges there, and that's from the oil soaking into the edges and stuff. So we'll get all this stuff cleared away and get to stitching, because there's a lot of stitching to do too. All right, I'd like to stitch while I'm standing up, and I'm going to start at the back flap on here, about in the middle, and then try to go all the way around, see where I get to. I've got quite a bit of thread on here. I've got about 10 feet, somewhere around there. I pulled 2 feet through on each side, and I'm just going to start and go, and you know, it's on the back flap, so hopefully none of that will be seen. It is a saddle stitch I'm going to do, so I am going to pull this through there and then even it up, and then just continue to do a saddle stitch all the way around it. Now luckily it's only one layer, so that makes it a whole lot easier, but it's still a lot of thread. And I'm using kind of a dark brown. I think it'll look good, a little contrast to it. Again, you can do whatever color scheme you want to do. The only thing I recommend is keep your stitches consistent. The way you pull it through, where you have your, which side you put in first, what direction you pull the tail through, it'll just make your stitches look that much better. And if you have a machine that'll sew this, go for it. You're not going to get more consistent than a machine. The original kit was probably already sewn together, and the only reason I say that is because there's nothing in the instructions that mention anything about stitching on here. So I can only assume that it was already in there. Now, it's probably not necessary to put this stitch line around there, but one of the things I can tell you is that leather is somewhat flexible. So this is kind of like stay stitching when you're making a shirt or something, you know, with a collar. You can put a stay stitch in there, and that kind of helps keep the fabric from stretching out. Well, leather being stretchy, it will also stretch out, and the thread in here kind of binds that edge together and helps keep it from being so stretchy, I guess you'd say. And this really doesn't take a long time, especially with only being one layer there, and the holes are cleanly punched through it, so it really goes pretty quick. And I believe I may have gotten lucky enough to get enough thread on here without having to piece it together, which makes it nice. All right, I went past one hole there to kind of lock everything together. And I don't know if I'm getting better at this or just lucky, but I had plenty of thread. So now I'm going to tie this off in the back. Now I don't have two layers of leather there where I can bury it in there, so I just have to tie it off. And it will be concealed by the where this folds over. It'll be hidden underneath there. Okay, I've got all my stitching on there. The next thing I need to do is I need to slick up the edges I can before I, sew it together, because it's going to make it that much harder if I don't do them now. So we'll get a little bit of gum track on here, which is what I prefer to use. I do have Tokonol, I just don't like it. Maybe I'm just weird that way. Okay, I got a damp sponge here, and we're going to get a little bit of the satin sheen on there and give it a little wipe down. Now, I've found in the past that this stuff, if you've dyed anything with a water-based dye and then you put this on there, it will cause some serious streaking. All right, so we will let that dry a little bit. Not too worried about getting it down in the grooves and the cracks and the places where I've tooled, because that's where I want the antiquing to go. I'm using this as what they would call a resist. So it resists getting dye in the places I don't want it. We're going to let that dry, and then we'll try it with the antiquing gel. Okay, so here it goes. It's either going to antique it the way I want, or it's going to stain it a much darker brown. So we're going to find out what it's going to do. Get a little bit of the antiquing gel on here, and we'll rub it in real quick. And it might actually do both, and then we'll wipe it off. Let's try to get a little bit more work down in there. Okay, so it actually did do both. It both darkened the whole thing just a little bit, and I'm okay with that because it's a little darker than the natural color and a little bit darker than with the olive oil on it, and I like it. I got lucky with that one. All right, yeah, I'm pretty pleased with the color of it, and the antiquing looks okay. Did darken my thread up a little bit, which is supposed to be a dark brown, but it's kind of black now. All right, so I'm happy with it. I like the way it turned out. So the next thing to do is let it dry again. I like the way it turned out. I really wasn't planning on it being too much darker, but really that I think turned out pretty nicely. The antiquing got down in the grooves quite a bit there. I did put a couple more coats of satin sheen over the top of it and on the back there because it is a water-based antiquing gel I used on there. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get this thing folded over and sewn together. I don't know that I'm going to put any glue on that. I think I'm just going to sew it up and then start doing the lacing on there. It goes a little slower when you're going through multiple layers like this, especially when I did not glue it and line up the holes like I normally do. I like to take the needle and wiggle it when I take it through there too, because that helps open up that hole just a little bit temporarily. Makes it a little easier to get the second needle through there. All right, got some lacing to do through all these holes now. They look like they're pretty well lined up. Seam looks a little jacked up, but it can all be straightened out with some water, and it will be. Okay, this is going to be something entirely new to me, and I have these two-prong lacing needles, and now they are a big flat needle, not a sharp point on them, but they're split on the wide end there, and they have two little prongs sticking through there. So what you do is you open that up, and then you put your lace in there, and those two little prongs will poke through that lace. If I can get them in there. I've never used them before. I've had them for a long time. And then you just take your pliers and you kind of squeeze it on there. And those prongs will go through that leather and really grab onto them. Now, one of the things I am going to do is trim up the end of this a little bit, so it makes it a little easier to get that lace through those holes. And we're going to give it a try and see how it does. Like I said, I've never done this before, so here's my first try. Where to start? Let's start through the back there, I think. And I see plenty of uses of pliers here to get that through there. Now, I believe I'm going to take the tail of this and kind of put it underneath there to hold it down. And it may take me a wrap or two to get it completely covered up. But I'm just going to loop it around there. Just go round and round and round and make sure that you don't get it twisted, because you want that good side to stay out, the finished side of it. Yeah, I think that'll work pretty good. Okay, now one of the things I have not tried yet to see if this thing actually fits the gun. So I've got it right here, and yeah, that fits pretty good. Plenty of room in there. The end of the barrel is about right there. So plenty of room to, I mean, you could put a 5.5 inch. This is a 4 3/4. You could put a 5.5 inch in there pretty easy. Now I'm going to have to get this thing wet molded, so it might not take water really well because I put so many coats of satin sheen on there. but we will find out. All right, now one of the things I did have to do also was the rivets I got for these are pretty short. Luckily, I had 4 of these longer ones, which I'm going to need to pass through the thicker section on there. And I think, yep, that'll get me on there. I also needed to get another hammer because one of those mallets I used was not going to be enough. And that should be set on there pretty flush. Pretty flush with the leather there. So we'll get the other one driven on there. You can tell when it's set all the way on there. It'll give you a nice, good, solid thud. So now I can go ahead and get the longer ones put through there. Then I can get that flap folded over and get it on there. You've got a hole in there and you've got a dimple in there. The rivet is going to go up in the hole there. And then the dimple part is after you cut these off, then you use that dimple part there to kind of round that rivet off there. Okay, now that I've got these cut off, there's a nice sharp edge on there. We want to eliminate that, so we're going to put it back on there. And then we're going to use that little rounded domed part there, put that over top of it. Give it a few good whacks, and that'll round off the top of that. I need a bigger anvil. Now those are pretty well rounded off there. No real sharp edges on there, but a lot of people will take their hammer and peen the end of that, and it'll kind of flatten it out a little bit more. That also flares that end out a little bit more so that it doesn't, that burr is not going to pull off of there. Now we can go ahead and get this laced up and then get our holster in there. There we go. Now I'm not going to adjust the length on this yet until I get the holster in there. So the next thing I got to do is hope that this is enough to do what I got to do there. All right, this part gets real tricky because they want you to put both of these back through there, which really gets to be a pain, and then form a blood knot on the bottom side of it there. Let's get this in there and see what everything's looking like. Okay, now that's far enough away from the end there that it will not interfere with the gun itself. Plenty of room there at the end of it. My hammer thong is a little bit loose, so I left a little bit of room on there so I can get that pulled down in there and get it tied up against it. Okay, I've got like half a blood knot on there. I'll trim that end up so it doesn't look so chewed up anyways. But it's not going to come apart, I don't believe. It does fit in there, the hammer thong goes on there, and it fits kind of loosely on there, but it will hold it so you don't accidentally pull it out, I guess. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get this thing wet down, get the gun wrapped up in plastic and everything, and wet it down with some really hot water, and get it stuffed in there so it will take the shape of the gun. All right, everybody, there it is, all nice and wet molded and pretty dry now, and it is zero retention. It kind of wiggles around in there like a bucket, like a fast draw holster should be. The dye lightened up a little bit after doing the wet molding on it, so some of that washed out. It still doesn't look too bad. I kind of like the lighter brown color like that. It makes the antiquing, I think, pop just a little bit more. It looks pretty good. I probably still could adjust that hammer thong a little bit more. I can still do that. That's a good thing because it just doesn't want to stay on there. You don't want it too tight because then it makes it hard to flip off of the edge there. But for fast draw, that's what you want right there. You want it to fit in there like a bucket. I think it looks pretty good. Next time I do something like this, I'm going to make my lace pieces a little bit longer because I just did not make these long enough, and I can still take it out and redo it. It's not glued in or anything, but I just wanted to use the pieces I already had cut. I didn't plan them for this, so that's just the way they worked out. Same thing with the lacing down the spine of it there where it's sewn together. That could have been a little bit longer too. But it looks pretty good. We'll just have to put it on and give it a try. All right, yes, it is unloaded. One of the nice things about this holster is it's a fast draw holster, so it's made oversized so that you can actually cock the hammer and the cylinder will rotate while it's in the holster without dragging or binding up or anything, and then you can pull it out and do your fast draw thing. It is unloaded, so don't worry about it. I do not have the tie down thong, the leg thong on there yet. And you can adjust this thing a little bit. I do not have the belt made for it. I don't have a pattern for the belt. This is just made from the pattern from Tandy, not from the kit, so it doesn't have the metal lining in it. So I don't know exactly what was contained in the kit, so I just went by the pattern and made the holster itself. It can still work even without the metal lining in it. You don't want to fire real ammo. The metal lining won't do anything to stop that. Wax bullets and even the leather will deflect the wax bullets, so you don't have to worry too much about that. The belt that was made for this actually had kind of a funky cut on it, so it actually tilted it forward even more. But that's my version of the Dee Woolem fast draw holster. Maybe one of these days. Thanks for watching Small Caliber Arms Review. If you could, reach up there and hit this button to check out some of my other videos, and hit this button down here to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.